So in this video, I would like to shed some light on some of the problems that we've had with our program that we made in a previous video. I think it was the supermarket program, and essentially the supermarket program. I mean, it's fine in and of itself, but it seems to have some logical errors. For instance, so if I were to update the sales uh, for each day of the week, I could do that, right? I could essentially populate an array which is responsible for updating those sales for each day of the week. And of course, this is an array of size 7, but you'll essentially see that I'm forced to sort of enter the monetary amount of the sales for each day of the week, or rather every day of the week. I can't, it's essentially not going to allow me to enter in, let's say, 3 days. Um, it's not going to allow me to enter in the sale for 3 or 4 days. I'm going to have to enter it for each and every single day, and then essentially when I do, let's say, 3 to find the highest earning, it will give me the highest earning, but the biggest problem here is that it'll give me the highest earning when I ask for it, but it won't give me the highest earning if I display the week's information. So essentially what I mean by that is if I populate the array again with random trivial values, and then I say 5 to display this week's, or actually 5 to display this week's information, it essentially it would give me the income on each day of the week. It won't give me the average income. It won't give me the highest income. It won't give me the total earnings. It'll only give me the lowest earning because I've asked for the lowest earning before, and then it was saved into memory. So essentially, what I'm trying to say is, this, like all of what you see in the display information section, is essentially going to be something that I mean, I had to choose the option to show the lowest earning for the week in order for it to show up here. That's not something I want to do. What I'd want to do is I'd want to have everything that I have now, but essentially I wouldn't want to, like I'd want to be able to enter in the values for just 3 days. And then when I click weekly information, it should be able to reflect the data of those 3 days. It should show me, okay, the income on day 1 is 20, the income on day 2 is this, or day 3 is that, and then the total is what the addition of all 3 days. Um, and it would give me the highest earning of those 3 days. It would give me the lowest earning for those 3 days. It would give me the average for those 3 days. And so it would update the display table. So when I click the display table, it should give me what the average income or the highest earning or the lowest earning is. I shouldn't have to choose those options beforehand in order for those to be essentially sort of initialized in memory and then displayed. So I want this to be a little more up to date and flexible and a little more dynamic, instead of making it pretty rigid here that I have to actually enter in values for each day. Sometimes I just want to enter in the values for 3 days, right? And if I do enter in the values for 3 days, then I want to be able to click the display, and then okay, it'll show me the values for those 3 days, only those 3 days, and then essentially give me what the average income or the highest earning or the lowest earning is for those 3 days only. But of course, it can't exceed 7 days or the length of the array. So we're just going to take these errors, so to speak, and essentially make another program which will hopefully um, resolve these errors. So we're going to create a new, let's see here. Can I not create a new class? What's the problem? So I've created a new class here, and recall that we're going to essentially start with having some options. So we're going to have a do while loop, and the while loop will essentially keep iterating until an option does not equal a particular number. Now this number essentially can only be decided once I actually have the options present. So I'm going to actually add in a scanner here. And I will initialize, or rather declare and initialize to a default value option. I'm going to import the java.util scanner. And I will then say, okay, press 1 to enter in, press 1 to update earnings for each day of the week. Update earnings. I'm just going to say update earnings. And I'm going to say, okay, the option will essentially equal whatever they enter. And of course, it's going to be an integer. So until the option does not, and then I'll say essentially, and this is of course a basic example, I'm going to complicate this later on, but it's going to be press 2 to, let's see. So we're going to say press 2 to exit the program. This is of course going to change, but I'm just working on the array part of it, which I'll explain shortly. But so I'm going to say until the option does not equal 2. So essentially I'm giving both of these options to the user to update earnings or to press 2 to exit. And I'm going to give them this option. So it's going to be a valid option. And so now essentially I'm going to say, look, if the option that they enter is essentially equal to 2, then or actually if the option they enter is equal to 1, and it shouldn't be giving me this error here. I'm not too sure why it is. Let's see. Cannot convert from int to Boolean. Yes, I actually have to use equals here. So if the option is equal to 1, then essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to populate an array. So the idea here is that there's going to be an array of 7 boxes. And these boxes are essentially the same thing as the length of the array. And I can enter in elements. And these elements are essentially going to be the monetary amount for my sales. Okay. And recall that each box essentially can store data, and it has an index going from 0 all the way to the end of the array. So here, this is the array of elements or potential elements. These are just really boxes, these empty spaces. And by default, they all store 0 inside them. Now, essentially, these are the boxes, but under them, as a reference, we actually have these indexes, right? So we have it starts from 0, goes to the length of the array. So if we have 7 boxes, we essentially really have the index up until 6. So I'm going to put this as a reference here at the top, just so we don't get confused along the way. So remember, these are the elements. Their defaults, of course, are 0, and they consist of elements. So I'm just going to put E here just to signify that they are going to consist of elements. Okay. And again, each box has an index starting from 0. So this one is essentially going to be 0. This one is going to be 1. This one is going to be 2. This one's going to be 3. This one's going to be 4. This one is going to be 5. And this one is going to be 6. Okay. Now, essentially, what we want to do is we want to populate the array, but we want to do it one at a time. We know that in our market program here, we know what was happening. It was essentially forcing us to populate each and every day of the array. So when we're populating the array, it doesn't let us not populate a particular day. We have to populate all days. And that's partly because when we go into the populate array method, let's say here, it's going for the length of the array. So it's going, so the iteration, the for loop is essentially iterating for the entire length of the array. It keeps iterating until it reaches the end of the array. So that's something that we don't want to carry on here. I guess we want to just do it once, and then if prompted, we'll go and do it again. So let's actually have a, so essentially what I'm trying to say is when I call when I call this method populate array, if I do populate, when I call the populate array method on a specific array that I have, it should only essentially populate the first element at the 0th index, and then when I call, when I do option 1 again to enter in another day, it should populate the next, and then it should populate the next, and then it should populate the next, so on and so forth. It shouldn't just force me to go through all of them. And so the array that I'm referring to here, it's going to be a method which takes in an array, and I'm going to call that array the sales array. And the sales array, I'm going to declare at the top, it's going to be double sales. It's going to be called sales array essentially. And it's going to have a length of, it's going to have a length of 7 because there are 7 days in a week. So the length is essentially different than the index. I think this is important to clear up, that we could have a, so when we do 7 in here, we open up 7 boxes of memory within which we can store potential data. But our indexes, because it's the count is starting from 0, is always going to be 1 less than the number of than the length of the array, the number of boxes that we have. So the length is different than the number of indexes. We could almost say that the number of indexes in total are 1 less than the number or the length of the array, right? Moving on. So we're going to do this populate array. So let's go ahead and actually make this method here. So this is, so we're still in the main method, right? This is where the main method sort of ends. This is going to be called populate array. So this is going to be, this is essentially going to be static, and it's going to be, it's going to return a double. It's going to return an array. And essentially what this populate array method will do is it will take in an array of a double array, and it's going to be any array. Essentially, we want it to be the array that we referred to here, that we're referring to here. And this would take any array, and essentially what it's going to do is it's going to allow us to populate each, populate one element at a time. Okay, so it's not going to force us to sort of go for every single day. So we're going to have a for loop here, and there are other ways to do this. I'll go over that later, but we're going to put a for loop here, and we're not going, so if we do I is less than sum array dot length, that's sort of problematic, because then this essentially sum array dot length will resolve to whatever the length of this array was. And so if we put sales array inside here, the length of sales array will resolve to 7. So this for loop will essentially iterate 7 times. And that would be problematic because then essentially what we want to do is we want to ask them to enter in the amount for this particular day. And then so it's going to ask us for, the amount 7 times. We only want it to ask us for the amount once for one particular index. So essentially what I'm really trying to say here is that if we have this conception of what an array is with with these boxes and whatnot, this is the length of the array, which is 7, and it's going to essentially ask us 7 times to enter in, and it will populate each empty empty box 7 times. We only want it to do it once. So really the idea here is to understand that, so we want to sort of start at 0, And what is 0, right? So if we have these indexes, what do these indexes really represent? These indexes represent the day that we're on, right? Yes, the count starts at 0, but when we're at 0, that's just the day that we're on. So what we can do when we populate the array is we can sort of enter in an integer variable here, which sort of keeps track, which essentially we're going to enter in an integer variable here, which keeps track of the day that we're on. And the day that we're on is nothing but the index. Okay, it's nothing but the index. So if I say, okay, if I say int day equals 0, this is going to resolve to 0. And so I is going to essentially start, I is essentially going to start iterating from 0. So if I say day here, so this is also going to take in an integer called day. It's very subtle what's happening here. I'm declaring something which keeps track of the day. Essentially what I want to do is I want to move through each of these boxes and populate each element one at a time. But these indexes really are sort of analogous to the day that we're on. So int I keeps track of the index. So when I say day, we're starting at 0 and we're working our way up, right? So now, so if the day is 0, which it will be for the first iteration, right? If day is 0, then we're going to start at the 0 and we're going to populate that that specific index with that specific element at index 0. So if we ask them here for enter amount, right? Enter amount for this day. And then we give them the chance to do that, right? We're going to give them the chance to do that. And of course, we can't do that yet because we don't have a scanner. It doesn't exist inside this particular scope. So we give them the ability to enter in a particular amount. We're on 0 at the moment. We're referencing 0 because day is 0 for the first iteration. And then when they enter in the amount, we essentially reference some array at a particular index. We're going to just put this as I because this means some array is referencing to this array. This array will obviously be the array that we enter, which is this one. And essentially at this point, we're referencing I. For the first iteration, I is 0. So I would essentially be referring to this, to the first element, the 0th index in the first element. And then what we're going to store in that is the amount. So for the first iteration, I is 0, and it stores in the amount that they entered at the 0th index, which would be the first element. And then when I increments by 1, 0 would essentially become 1. And then we're now talking about the second element. Okay, but so it's going to start. So we're just going to put I here. Now the thing that I want to stress is we're going to do this 7 times. Okay, we're going to do this. We're going to do this 7 times. So to sort of demonstrate what I mean here, and this method is essentially going to return the array after it's been populated. So if I say, let's see here. So, and then I say, okay, so if I say populate, let me just end the method here for end populate. Now let me do a static print, static void. It's not going to return anything. It's just going to print. It's going to take in. It's going to take in a. It's going to take in any array, and it's essentially just going to. It's going to be a for loop int I equals 0. I should be less than the array.length. And it's essentially going to just print out print out each element. Okay, so if I were to essentially, if I were to go back to my do while here and print out after it's been populated. So I'm going to print out sales array. I'll show you what's happening. So this is problematic, right? So it says press 1 to update earnings. I press 1, and now it's asking me to enter the amount for this day. So I say 50, then I say 20, then I say 21. It's going to ask me this 7 times. So it's going to ask me this 7 times because it's the method which is responsible for taking in this input and populating the array essentially iterates for sumArray.length times, which would be 7. And so this is not printing out the values. It's going from 0 through 6. So it's just printing out the indexes really. When we do the print method, I is 0 for the first one. So then it prints out I, and then I is 1 because I increments, and then it prints out 1. So what we actually have to do is we have to reference the sumArray, and now it prints out the index, the element at sumArray index 0. So for the first iteration, it would print out the element at sumArray index 0, and then when I increments to 1 on the second iteration, it would print out what's in the first. It would print out the element of which one, which is of course the index is referencing. So here we just do this, and then it would print out pretty much everything in the array. So when we do update the earnings, we can do 20, we do 21, 22, and then after we sort of populate the array, it'll just spit those values back to us. But this is not what we want. What we want to do is we want to essentially just we want to populate one array we want to populate one element at a time. We're just populating every single element, and it's forcing us to do that, right? Because the for loop iterates 7 times. So it's actually just doing everything that the market program was, right? It's just doing everything that the market program was. It's making us, so that's giving me an exception, but it would have made me enter in the values 7 times forcefully. It's not giving me the option to not do that or only enter it for 1 day. So what we want to do this time is we want to say, okay, so so we're on, let's say day is equal to 0. Okay, so we're at the first index and we're changing the first element to amount. What we want to do then is we want to go to the next element and populate that one. So this is out of the question. We're not going to do this 7 times or sumArray.length times. We want to go to the next element and populate this array. So in order to do that, we want to essentially, if it's called once, in order to sort of do that, we want I to be less than day plus 1. That's because right now day is 0, and it will only iterate once because I must be less than day plus 1. Day plus 1 in this case is 1. So we're at 0, and then day plus 1 is 1. So then I will be less than day plus 1, so it will only populate this array. You get what I'm saying? So what I'm saying is I is day, and for the first iteration, day is 0. I will only iterate if I, like this loop will keep iterating until I is less than day plus 1. Day plus 1 is this. So if we're here, if day is 1, then day plus 1 is 2. If day is 2, then day plus 1 is 3. It will essentially only iterate day plus 1. It will only iterate if I is less than day plus 1. So essentially what that means is, this would only iterate once, right? Because I is 0 in the main method. And since this loop should only iterate until I is less than day plus 1, it would only iterate. It would only let me store the first, see? So it's essentially, it's printing out all those values in the array, but I is less than day plus 1. So 0 will never equal day plus 1. It must always be less than day plus 1. When it does equal, we'll break out of the loop and stop populating. Okay. So this only lets me update the earnings one time. Okay. It only lets me update the first array, or the first element of the array, right? Because I is always set to 0. That's what I've done. The default value for I is 0. Now what I want to do is when I call this option again, option 1, which populates the array, what I want it to do is I want it to save the value I entered for the first element, and then I want it to sort of go to this one and only enter the value in for this one. Okay, not this one, but this one. So it only does this one at a time. And the way to do that is, okay, so I entered in, so hypothetically we're in the program and I entered in the amount for this day for the first element, okay? And what I want to do now is I want to essentially increment I by 1 and then move to the next element and then populate that array. So the next time I populate that element, so the next time I call this array or this method, I want to increment I or day by 1 so that it moves to the next element. Okay. And when we move to the next element, let me just so when we move to the next element, we're going to populate this array, and I must be less than day plus 1. So I will never go to this one. I will always be this one itself, because day plus 1 is 2. So it's never going to be 2. It must always be less than day plus 1. So I is less than day plus 1 at all times. So it's not going to move on to populate this element. It will just populate this element and cut off. Okay. And then when I call this method again, if I do, it'll allow me to populate, and then it will increment I by 1 or day by 1, and then it'll move on to the next one, and then it'll say that day must be less than day plus 1. So you get what I'm saying, the pattern here. So when I update earnings now, you can see that I've updated the first element. Okay, so essentially what's happening here is day was set to 0, and then after I populated, essentially I called on the populate array, which takes in the array and takes in the day, and the day is nothing but the index, so we're at the 0th index because day is equal to 0. And then it allows me to populate that. The next time I call this option, it's going to send me back to the populate array. And well, okay, so essentially, look, when we're on the first iteration, when day is equal to 0, it sends me to the populate array, and it takes in this array, and it takes in the value of 0 for the day, and we know that the day is nothing but the index, and we're now referring to sales array, and then it takes me to 0 and lets me populate this particular array or element, and then it breaks out, and then it increments day by 1. So the next time we call populate array, the value of day, or really the index, is going to be 1. So it's then going to allow us to populate the next element. But since day will be less than day plus 1 at all times, it won't populate the second element, and it'll do that pattern for all the elements that exist. So now when I press 1 to update earnings and I do 20, 20, 25, it'll fill in the second one. And then when it'll say enter the amount for this day, I choose to do it again, it'll just keep filling these in, and it'll do this one at a time. You can see it's letting me do that. Okay, so I'm just filling in all these values for the array. Now it's going to give me an out of bounds exception. So that's how we do that, right? So now let's just move on with the program here. Enter the amount for this day. I don't want to say enter the amount for this day. I want to say enter the amount for day 1, 2, and 3, right? So famous rule here is to just do index plus 1. And that would essentially just be, so we're not changing, the index really in the array. We're just saying, okay, normally if I were to do I here, right? If I were to say, if I were to do I, it's going to say enter the amount for this day, or enter the amount for day 0, because I is 0 on the first iteration. And then on the second iteration, it'll say I is enter the amount for day 1. So we're always lagging 1 behind the day we want to be. So when I do, it's saying it'll say enter the amount for day 0, and then enter the amount for day 1, right? So, but we're actually on the second day. So if I do I plus 1, it'll just say enter the amount for day 1. It won't start at 0, it'll start at 1. And then I'm not actually changing where I am in the array. I'm just saying, okay, I reference is 0, and it keeps incrementing. That's exactly what I want to happen. And so I'm going to put a space here. But so now, let's see. So now that I have this print array thing, but I don't need it. I was just referencing it before just to show you that it will populate that array. Now I can just sort of speed up and fill in some of the requirements. So for this one here, we're actually not going to press 2 to exit the program. I think that's going to be like, okay. And let's see, that's going to be a number, any number. So we're going to press 1 to update earnings. We're going to do system.out println press 2 to, let's see, press 2 to find highest sale or highest earning, right? Press 3 to find lowest earning. Or let me just do highest earning here. System. Press 3 to find total earnings. And press 4 to find average earning. Or income average, right? And we'll also do press 5 to find, or press 5 to exit the program. Okay, so until, essentially we're going to do all of this until the option is equal to 5. So I think we've satisfied the populate array part. And this is going to be else if the option essentially is equal to 2. We're going to have a double called highest earning, and highest earning, and the highest earning will essentially just be we're going to reference a method which actually takes in a sales array, or takes in any array really, but it's going to take in our sale. It's going to take in an array, which is going to be our sales array. Okay. And okay. So when it does that, so now we're going to actually have to bring that method into fruition here. So we're going to have static double, let's see, highest earning. So basic algorithm here to find the highest value in an array. It'll take in an array, right? We're just going to call it sum array. And this is going to have a for loop. I should be less than sum array dot length. We'll see if that's probably a good idea later. And we'll do I++. So essentially, we're going to assume that the highest value, highest earning in the array is essentially the first element, which would be at index 0. We're just going to assume that's the case. And then we'll compare it to the next. And then if that's the highest earning, we'll set that to the highest earning. So we're going to say, look, if any given element at a particular index is greater than highest earning, then that would just imply that the highest earning is then not what the highest earning was before, but instead what that particular element was at that index. Okay. Otherwise, highest earning won't change, and it'll keep doing that for the length of the array, and it would just update the value as we move along. Now the thing is, and then of course we're going to, after the for loop ends, we'll just return whatever the highest earning was or is. Now the thing is, essentially, so I actually do want to find the lowest. System.out.println, press 5 to find the lowest earning, and I'll tell you why shortly. Then press 6 to exit. So 6 is going to be our exit, folks. So this would be the highest earning, and this would be the lowest earning. Static double lowest earning. Double, it's going to take in an array as well. Okay, and then we are going to have the for loop again. I will be less than the length of the for loop. We're going to increment I each time. And we're going to say, look, lowest value is a double, and it's going to essentially be 0. We're going to assume that, not 0, but it's going to essentially be, it's going to be the first element of the array. And if any given element at a particular index is lowest than the lowest value that we already know of, which we were assuming was the first index or the first element at the first index, we'll just essentially set the lowest value to whatever that value was at that array. And after all is said and done, we'll return the lowest value. Okay. So if they choose 4 or if they choose 2, it'll find the highest earning. But if they choose 5, it'll find the lowest earning, right? Let's see here. 3 to find the total earning, 2 to find the highest earning. So we're going to update these values. 3, 2, or 3, 4, 5. Okay. So if the user were to choose, okay, so then if the user were to choose 2, it would give them the highest earning, and then I would just print out highest earning. Otherwise, if the user chose 3, then I'll store the lowest earning in a double, which is essentially going to refer, it's going to send us back to the method which actually gets me the lowest earning. I'm going to load the sales array, so it's actually going to give me the lowest element in the array for the sales array that I declared at the top. And essentially here, I'm just going to say the lowest earning, and it'll just give me the lowest earning. So what I want to show you here, and I'm actually going to bring back our print method to show you what's going on. So when I update the earnings and I enter the amount for one day, it populates the first element. Then when I update the earnings again for day 2, and I say 40, it updates the second element in the array, right? However, when I do 2 to find the highest earning, it gives me the right answer. The highest earnings thus far is 40. What's the lowest earning thus far? Well, traditionally we would say that the lowest earning is 20. But when I do the lowest earning here, when I say, okay, give me the lowest earning, which is option 3, it says that the lowest earning is 0.0. Because it's also taking into account all these other zeros that we have here in the array. It's not just taking into account, I only want it to take into account these 2 values. I only want it to find the lowest of these 2 values, not the lowest of the array.length. So essentially for the lowest and highest array, if we go back to these methods here, for the highest and lowest array, we're iterating for some array.length. So it iterates through the entire length and gives me the highest or lowest value. It doesn't only iterate through, this, through the values that we have initialized thus far. These are also initialized values. They're just set default to 0. Default doesn't mean that they're not initialized. They're just by default initialized to the value of 0. So I don't want, so for when it finds the highest or when it finds the lowest, I don't want it to keep iterating through the entire array. I only want it to keep iterating through the array, or through 0 and 1 or 2. I only want it to iterate up until the values that we've initialized. So I should be less than, so this is the day. When I say 40, we're on the second day. So I only want it to start iterating from the first, and then it stops at the second. So I want it to stop at day plus 1. I'm going to say I should be less than day plus 1, because here we're on a particular day. Day plus 1 is 0.0. So I, which in this case is 0, 1, which in this case is 1, will be less than day plus 1. It's not going to, as soon as it equals day plus 1, it'll break out of the loop and not let me populate. Okay, so essentially the day that I have entered here is keeping track of the index. Okay, and the same goes for, so I only want it to essentially, let's see, I only want it to stop at day plus 1, which means, because the value of day, the value of day is initialized inside this populate array. Okay, you'll see that here in the populate array method, or well, it's not initialized really, but day is essentially incremented after we go through the populate array, right? And then that value is saved throughout. So day actually has a consistent value. So if we've populated for, if day only equals 2 because we've populated the array twice, then that value for day is going to be consistent. So if we refer to, if we say, okay, if we refer to the day here, it will only give me the highest earning for 2 days. It's not going to do it for the entire array. The same thing here. Day has a consistent value because it's incremented. The do while, it carries over the value of day as day is initialized. It updates the value for day. So if I refer to day anywhere else, because it's actually a global variable, it will reflect that. Day is nothing but the index. So if I put day here and day is 2, and I go into the highest earning, and I say, okay, I should be day. I should be day, and I will only iterate. This for loop will only iterate until I is less than day plus 1. No, if I is less than day plus 1. It won't take me to the next element. So I actually have to add in day here to make this valid. This day would represent this day that I have here. Okay. Same thing for this one. Okay. And now it should only give me the highest value for that particular, only for the amount of days that I've initialized. So if I have initialized for, 3 days, it should only give me the highest for, let's see, it should only give me the, it still gives me zero. Wow. Does it give me the highest value for the, it does give me the highest value, but it doesn't even give me the highest value. Highest earning is 20. That's actually not even true. Let's see. $40. Yeah, so maybe I've messed up in my highest value. So as we iterate through, let's see. Yeah, I think maybe the problem is that we're always constantly, we've referenced day here, but we should start going from the 0th index onwards. And then only go up until the day that we've initialized and stop at day plus 1. So that was right, but we put day here. So let's actually start at 0 in the array and traverse through the entire array up until day, which would be the value up until the value that we've initialized in the array, and stop at day plus 1, or just stop iterating until while I is less than day plus 1, or rather I is less than day plus 1. So I think now it should allow, I think now this should work. So I've only entered, I'm going to enter one more value. I've only entered three values here. So, and then I say, okay, press 2 to find the highest earning. So, or lowest, because it should give me 5 to find the lowest earning. Whoa, still gives me 0. What's the deal? So I should actually be, essentially, it should be less than, it should be less than day, not day plus 1. Then only then would we get an accurate answer here for the highest and lowest array. And so in order to demonstrate that, let's see. Update earnings. And essentially, if we were to update the earnings, give me a second here. It just prints it out, doesn't allow me to update the earnings. Let's see. When I click 1, it should allow me to populate the array. I'm not too sure what it's doing. I think I must have done something wrong here. Let me see. Whoa. Just goes straight to print. Yeah, I must have messed around with populate array. Yeah, so now it sort of allows me to update the earnings. So I've updated the earning here, and if I were to update the earning again, 1 second. So if I were to update the earning to 10, and now I'd update the earning to 20. So in order to find the lowest earning, it still prints 0. Interesting. It should just be day. That's why it's giving me an issue. Now it gives me the lowest earning, which would be 2. And so that's how we find the highest and the lowest earning. To find the income average, we'll just essentially make a method for that, right? So it's going to be called average, and it's going to be static double. It's going to return an average, right? So it's going to be called average. It's going to take in the array. So it's going to be a double array, and it'll also take in the days, which will represent the index that we're on. And we're going to use a for loop. Will we use a for loop? No. We'll just essentially, so we have an average, and the average essentially equals the number of the sum of all the days. So we'll definitely need a sum for all the numbers that we enter in. What we'll do is we'll call a sum method and enter in sum array, okay? And we'll enter in the days as well. And we'll divide that by 7 because, no, we'll divide that by, not the length of the array. We'll essentially divide that by how many entries there were. So that would just be the number of days, right, that we entered thus far. But that would be 0 plus 1. So it starts at 0, so we'd actually want to do plus 1, because if you think about it, if we were to enter in 3 values, these would have indexes of 0, 1, and 2. And we would essentially want to divide, we would do the sum divided by the number of entries. There are 3 entries, but 2 indexes, 0, 1, 2. So if indexes are keeping track of the days, the number of entries are actually 3. So that would be index plus 1. And since we know our days actually keeps track of the index, that would be days plus 1, in my opinion. So now we actually have to have a sum method. Sum, this will take in a double array as well, and it'll take in the days, which would represent which index we're on. There's going to be a double called sum, and we're going to iterate through the entire, we're only going to iterate for days, iterate for days. We're only going to iterate for the amount of days that we're, the particular day that we're on, until we're at the particular, until I is less than the day that we're on. And so essentially then what we'll do is we will just add some to, we'll just compound. So for the first iteration, sum will just equal whatever is at that particular index in the array. And then it'll compound onto itself. And after that's all said and done, we'll just return the array, essentially. No, we'll just return the sum. So then this is now valid, and the average would essentially, it would give us an average, and then we just return that average. So if lowest, press 5 to find the income average. So else if the, so if they were to press 4, then it would just give them the total, right? Total earnings, which would be nothing but a double called sum, which takes in the array itself called sales array and the amount of days. This is, in this case, just day, because the variable that we have up here is just day. And after that some calculating, we can just put the sum here. And we'll actually put in this, right, total earnings. And we'll actually do that process for these guys as well. Otherwise, if they choose option 5, then we know that they want to have the income average. So we're going to make a double which stores the average, and it'll calculate the average taking in the sales array and the index that we're on, which is represented by the day variable. And then of course we'll just print out income average. And we'll put our little money sign here as well. Otherwise, options equals 6. I guess they want to see everything. They want to, ooh. Press 6 to print this week's info. Okay, so we're going to exit when we're at 7, not 6 anymore. So if they choose 6, essentially that will take them to a print, and we're going to enter the array and the amount of days again, or the day that is. This is not actually a method, so we're actually going to have to make a print method, which will print in relevant details. So this would be static double print double array, and it'll take in a certain amount of days, which will represent the index we're on. And essentially what this will do is it will print out, it'll essentially print out, let's see here. It'll print out, well, I'd want it to print out all the values that they made per day, right? So that would essentially just be, do I have a method that does that? Yeah, I have a method that does that. I'm going to call this method values or display so that I can differentiate it from the print method. So earnings, right? Earnings this week, and then I'll call on the print method, which will essentially take in the array and the amount of days. This print array doesn't actually take in the amount of days. I want it to though. But actually, maybe I don't even know I don't need to take in the amount of days. I want to print out all the values. So maybe I don't need to take in the amount of days here. It'll just take in any array. In this case, it would be the array that I have declared here, but that of course would represent later on the sales array. And then it'll print out the values. But when it does print out the values, I want it to say, okay, earnings on day. And then it's going to be I plus 1, which is the same thing as saying index plus 1. And next on day 1, and then it would print this out with the $sign, hopefully. Okay, and now it should just print that stuff out. It should also print the total. Which would just be printing out the sum, the array in question. It's not letting me call sum because I actually have to put days as well, which would represent the index that we're on, right? I actually have to put day here because there are many methods which take in day, total earnings, and then we'll have highest earning. That would call highest earning. That would take in the array itself and the day. And then of course we'll add this for shits and giggles, you know how it is. Then we'll have the lowest earning. We'll take in, again, the array itself and the index that we're on. And then, of course, our iconic. We'll have average earning, which will just print out the average, the day that we're on, and, of course, the iconic. I think that's it. Let's see, is that it? Yeah, that's it. Awesome. So if they press 6, it's going to print out this week's info. It's going to do print. It's going to be display. Otherwise, if the option is 7, it should just say buy. Otherwise, invalid input. Okie dokie. Press 1 to update the earning. Ooh, it's probably going to print out those values, which I don't want to happen. I didn't want to print this stuff, to be quite honest. I just wanted to show you that it works. This program's definitely getting slow. I'm going to update the earnings. Press 1 to update earnings. Look for day 2, and then day 4, or oops, now it's going to show me the total earnings, which is 60. Is that correct? 20 and 40, is that 60, guys? And then we'll do 3 to find the lowest earning. Is it 20? Yeah. 5 to find the income average. Does find the income average. And if I do print this week's info, whoa, can't click this week's info. Interesting. Let's see why that's the case. If this wouldn't take such a long time to load, dude, shit. I think I should probably just restart the program or some shit, but this gives a whole different meaning to the importance of runtime, right? Damn. I have to definitely restart Eclipse here. If the video ends because I've reached my time limit, then I wish all of you luck. Eclipse. Tough luck. Can't even minimize the tab here. Hopefully, let's see. I'm going to go to Files, go to Desktop, and then I'm going to load up Eclipse from there. All right. So I think the program should work pretty fast now compared to before. Yeah. Now I can update the earnings. Now if I were to press 5, display weeks info, or 6, it gives me an error. It says must return type double. Interesting. What's wrong? Yeah, I gotta return a double here, which is probably not something I wanted to do. You can see how it's not forcing me to do every day of the week. That's sort of what we wanted. And 6 to print out this week's info. So it gives me the earnings for each day and gives me the total. Is that the total? 50 and 40 and 20, right? 110 is the total. Highest earning is 50. Yeah. Lowest earning is 20. Ooh. 40, 50, 40, and 20. Yeah, I guess that's the average. There are, of course, problems. Problems are that maybe I could space out my this more so that doesn't pose that big of a problem when it keeps repeating the loop, right? And if I enter in one more value, then I say 6 to print this week's info. Yeah, that's a little better. Total earnings and whatnot. Maybe I can segment off earnings this week, right? Would that be good? I think that's fine. But another thing you'd notice is that if we can actually put a negative cash amount, which is probably not the best thing. So if I were to do update the values, I can actually do -2, and then that would actually reflect in my total earnings, right? -$2. What does that even mean? So essentially, what we want to do in this case is where do we go to enter in the values? Well, we go to populate array. So when we go to populate array, when we go to populate array, we can actually just sort of say, okay, they can enter an amount, but if the amount they enter is greater than, let's say, if it's greater than 0, then and only then will I allow them to set their amount equal to whatever element in the array they set the amount to. Otherwise, I'll print out invalid, or yeah, just put invalid. Doesn't let them do that. And then it also reflects when I print out this week's info, it doesn't save that amount. It doesn't save -2. So it doesn't save that value. Another thing is I can actually keep adding values for each day of the week. I can do update earnings, I can do 20, I can do 2, I can just keep populating the array, but you can see that it'll let me go to 8, which is not something I want to happen. You can only enter it for 7 days a week. So what do? Well, we recognize that this is being incremented by 1. So essentially, we have in our program here, we have 7 boxes, and these boxes have indexes. Okay, and those indexes are kept track by day variable, which is incremented each time you populate. So for the first time, day is 0, and it populates that element. And then after after we're done populating, it breaks out, and then essentially increments day by 1, and then we move on to the next, and then we move on to the next, and then we move on to the next. And so when we're at the 5th, or when we're at the 6th index, we're actually populating the 7th element, and it essentially allows us to go off the edge of the array. And so then we're out of bounds. So when we're at the 6th index, if we're less than or equal to the 6th index, we can populate. Otherwise, we're not going to populate. So what we do here is look, if the day is, and we're doing this here because this is where we're incrementing day, and this is where we're allowing the user to populate. We don't want the user to populate if day sends back a value which is greater than. So if day is less than or equal to 6, then and only then can you populate the array and increment day by 1. Otherwise, they must have reached the edge of the array. So we're just going to say cannot enter in values. Maximum number of days reached. Let's see if this one works here. Oh, it says maximum numbers of days reached immediately. So it must have been if days less than or equal to, right? Not greater than, because in no way is it going to ever be, it's not going to let us, it's not going to be greater than, right? So let's just see. Yeah, so so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. What? Let's see here. So day is 0 first time, then day is 1, then day is 2, then day is 3, then day is 4, then day is 5, then day is 6. We can enter the amount for day 7, but then it says that the maximum numbers of days are reached. So it doesn't allow us to do it the 8th time because there aren't 8th days, or 8 days rather. So that's really the whole entire program right there. But there is something else that I'd like to show you. So there's actually a completely other way to do this. Let's see, a workforce solution. You can see here, when I share my screen, hopefully someday, you can see here that what he's done here, this person, is he's done everything that we've done essentially, but he's equated number of days equal to this. And what this is essentially doing is it's triggering the ability to populate the array. And so when we go to the enter amount, he's just saying, well, you can populate the array. And again, the day just stands for index, right? Number of days is just the index. And then so he says, you can, it allows you to enter in the value and everything, but then it just sets that index to the amount. And the index represents which element we're on. He doesn't need to use a for loop. Then he increments index by 1 and returns index. And that index would essentially represent moving on to the next element in the array. So that when he comes back here, index now doesn't have a value of 0 as it did before. It now has a value of 1. So then it populates, when it does the array index equals amount, it's actually storing the new amount into the element at index 1 instead of the element at index 0 as it did on the previous time. So that was pretty cool on his part. So I'm just showing that there's many ways to do this.